Hello, everybody. I'm Bernhard and this is Men of Hope, a Hope's Garden community. Today, we want to talk about communicating for intimacy, particularly with our wives, or if you are not yet married, with your fiance, and if you are not yet engaged with your girlfriend. I think that can help us all to learn more about how to communicate better with one another. I have Bobby Aborn with me. Hi, Bobby.
Good afternoon.
He lives here in Steubenville, Ohio with his wife, Christy. He is a financial coach and consultant, and his main apostolate since 17 years is prepping engaged couples for marriage and also accompanying them after their marriage, right? Or like marriage mentoring, that's what you also call it. And he's doing that apostolate together with his wife, of course. And yeah, is there anything else you would like to share about yourself, Bobby?
Well, I've been married for 27 years. 17 of those years I've been involved in marriage prep. We can talk a little bit about how I got involved in that. You know, I'd been married for almost 10 years before I got involved in the ministry. But originally from Boston, Massachusetts. I'm a U.S. military veteran. I served on active duty for 9 years. I work as, like I said, a licensed financial advisor and have my own financial planning practice. Both my wife and I are graduates of Franciscan University of Steubenville. Moved here to the Ohio Valley 19 years ago, which is crazy to think. So originally from Boston, Massachusetts, I think I said that. And it's good to be here.
It's awesome. It's good to have you. Thank you. Thank you for your time. So can you maybe share a little bit more about the ministry of prepping engaged couples and marriage mentoring?
Yeah, sure. So for us, it started in 2007. I was married in 1997. My wife and I were born and raised in Catholic homes. Growing up in Boston, I was really a kind of a sub-nominal Catholic, Catholic by title. And then when we had met, when I was on active duty at my first military assignment, we actually met and got married in 4 months of knowing each other. And then we got married through the justice of the peace. We were not practicing Catholics. And, that's pretty crazy. I don't recommend that for anybody in the dating scene. And of course, we were married outside of the church, which I do not encourage as well. But that was our story. That was what, was happening in our life. And then we lived a secular life for about 3 years. And 3 years into our marriage, I happened to be assigned. I was living overseas in the country of Turkey with U.S. military. And my wife and I really had conversions to the faith through a married couple that actually invited us to their home around a table and really kind of welcomed us where we are. We were involved in youth ministry through this couple and through the parish we were involved in. But really, it was there that we became sacramentally married or convalidated in the church. And we came into full communion with the Catholic Church, and really sacramentally the grace of the marriage was, I think, starting to be realized. And that continued for about 7 years. We came here to Steubenville. We went to college as older students at Franciscan. And then in 2007, there was a group of people that were interested in wanting to start a marriage mentoring program for those who were engaged to be married. And we were privileged enough to be invited to be a part of this retreat weekend. And in order to do the couple mentoring, you had to go through a marriage retreat yourself. And so we kind of went through the same program that we shared with the engaged. And it was written by this incredible couple named Ron and Kathy Fair, who were connected with this priest from Eastern Pennsylvania by the name of Father Gallagher, and they wrote this program called Preparing to Live in Love. And it really is arguably, to me, I think, one of the greatest marriage prep programs that I've ever seen because of the content and the way that the program was administered, which was primarily done through kind of one-on-one or two-on-two couples being together and learning about various aspects of what it takes to have a successful and thriving marriage. And so we started it and we did it. And we had couples that were helping and volunteering, and the mentoring program took off. And then couples they started kind of falling off. They weren't available. They were busy, raising their families. And Christy and I ended up kind of spearheading this program, and really did for a number of years. I think we led that program at Franciscan for, I think 5 or 6 years. A lot of engaged couples came through our program at Franciscan that we were facilitating, the Preparing to Live in Love, that Ron and Kathy had and I think it's still going on to this day, believe it or not. But we just, it was a real ministry. And then we would stay in touch with those couples, or other married couples would reach out to us and want to talk, and we would just keep paying forward, I think, what we received, the information. It was too good not to share, right? So even if it wasn't done in a formal capacity, we were always just continued to keep paying it forward. And so really this ministry of marriage prep for us was something that really just happened organically. We didn't set out to say we wanted to create it or do it. I'm not a counselor. I always say this, I have no counseling background. I'm just an ordinary guy showing one beggar where the another beggar where the food is, right? And that's kind of my approach to it. But I think after 27 years of marriage, my wife and I really just feel compelled to share the gift of our marriage. And if anybody needs help or encouragement, I mean, I always say marriage is a team sport, and I think sometimes in the church we've lost that mindset. We don't really lean on each other as much as I think we ought to. So that's really, I think, where our work was born and continues to this day, in kind of an unofficial capacity. There's no website, there's no, building to come to. It's just us rolling up.
Your reputation here in Steubenville is like big, like good. There are many people who sing your and Christy's highest praises. And me and my wife are one couple who went through your marriage prep, and it was really magnificent. Like that program that you mentioned from Ron and Kathy Fair, Prepare to Live in Love. What are maybe some key aspects? What makes it so special, this program?
Oh, man, yeah. It's hard to give a short answer to that question.
Yeah.
How they constructed the program was over 7 sessions. And it's not only just being together with couple, but also homework that the couple would go and do individually, and then come back together as a couple and do. And then, and then share with you as a mentor couple, what their experience was, and to facilitate the conversation in the context of that. But it's very human to me. So it's rich with theology, but it's not theological. It's very incarnational. It's human. Yeah. And I think that's what makes it so unique. It's, when I was teaching the program at the university, I used to say to them on the first day of the program, I said, just because you're Catholic doesn't mean your marriage is going to work. Just because you are getting married on the feast day of so-and-so doesn't mean your marriage is going to be successful and thriving. Mm-hmm. But it's because you're Catholic. It's because you have access to the sacraments. You have the capacity to have the most incredible life-giving marriage on this side of heaven. I mean, it really, at the end of the day, heaven is about a marriage. It's a marriage between the Lord and his church. Yeah. So what are we as marriages? We're called to be in union with the marriage of all marriages. And that's what makes what we do so incredibly beautiful as Catholics. But you got to roll your sleeves up, because you bring yourself into the marriage. And so one of the things that's so powerful about the program is it's human, it's incarnational. It asks you to evaluate and think about patterns of behavior, expectations, things that you're bringing into the relationship that you might be completely unaware of. Yeah. What are my tendencies and my behavior? Things I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts. You might hear a little bit of my Boston accent just in our conversation. I didn't realize that I didn't grow up not speaking the letter R. I drove a car, and I went over there and here, and work was hard, and this is how I spoke. I didn't realize that there was an R missing in my words until I went off into the military and realized, oh my goodness, I have an accent. My accent was something I grew up in. It was absorbed, a part of my environment. So much of our relational dynamics are the same way, right?
Yeah.
Depending on the home and the dynamics we come from, the community and society. So what Preparing to Live in Love does is really helps us kind of really reflect on who I am and what I'm bringing into the relationship, and then covers various topics that are very targeted towards bringing a couple together so that when they show up on their wedding day, and if you remember, our time together, the first time that you and Anna and my wife and I were together, I said, the most important question you're asked on your wedding day is, do you come here freely?
Yes. Mm.
And at the core of Preparing to Love is to set a couple up for showing up on their wedding day freely, not fixed. Freedom doesn't mean fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's an important distinction.
Yes. And I loved what you said, like from the very beginning, you like the theology behind that with when you compared it to the way of the cross, right? That as Catholics, we make the vow of matrimony in front of the altar.
Yeah.
On Calvary.
Yeah.
And if you can take your wife's hand and you are the one, and with you we go to Calvary together.
Yeah.
Then I know you're the right one. I wanna for the rest of our life, we hand in hand go towards Calvary through the good times and bad times. And I mean, it's a huge challenge, right?
Yeah. It's a beautiful invitation, though, right? Mm-hmm. It makes marriage meaningful and purposeful. It's not just a societal contract. It's a covenant. And it's a covenant that is Venerable Fulton Sheen beautifully wrote a book called 3 to Get Married. It's a covenant of 3 people.
Yeah.
It's a husband and a wife before their Lord. And I think that context is so important. But life happens, right? So it's like that gets a little kind of theological and maybe ethereal and feels a little like heady. Mm-hmm. But like, what are you supposed to do? Like when you and your wife
exactly.
you want to put boxing gloves on instead of praying a rosary together, right?
Yeah. So yeah, let's get a little bit more practical here, because like I remember one of the sessions was communicating for intimacy, and I wanted to have that being a topic because intimacy, and this is a podcast for men. Intimacy sometimes, doesn't taste so well for us, like in our society also, like sharing feelings or intimacy or being vulnerable, right, is often viewed as something maybe more feminine or maybe something, I don't know. What would you recommend for men in this regard, like particularly communicating for intimacy? What is it, and what are the skills we could practice? Like I love this program of Prepare to Live in Love because it's really very practical. Mm-hmm. Many practical skills and tools to really get on a very deep level in your marriage.
Yeah. I think it's I think that I agree with you. Sometimes intimacy and feelings can feel a little, non-masculine, maybe, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I think that defining terminology is important, and understanding, what it means to say communicating for intimacy. How we define it, and how Ron and Kathy kind of built it in the program, was first understanding that, communication is first and foremost about being other-centered. It's about the other person. And I think if we want to be honest, I think that a lot of communication in today's day is about me telling you what I want to tell you. I want to get my point across. But ultimately, in good sacrificial communication, particularly in the context of marriage, we're talking about a marital dynamic or a relationship of intimacy or romantic understanding, is to be understanding that I have something I want to communicate to you, and I want you to be able to receive it. I have information that I want to share with you. And so it's about being other-centered. It's about wanting to will the good of the other, as we define what truly love is really defined as, right? To will the good of the other. What does it mean to will the good of the other? Well, it means to approach that person with sensitivity and compassionate understanding and respect. And so the way we speak to our spouses, I think, is important. And I have to admit, I mean, as a husband, I have not always been the most charitable in the way that I communicate with my wife. I think often one of my primary sins that I confess is not being charitable to my wife, lacking charity in the way that I speak to my wife, who deserves nothing but utmost respect and care. And regardless of what mood she's in, by virtue of who she is and in my marital covenant, she deserves to be spoken to in a way that is reflective of the goodness and the beauty that she is as my wife. And so, but I'm not always thinking about that on my day-to-day. You know, I'm not thinking about that when I'm grumpy or angry or tired or, you know, and so and then information in the way that we communicate is often, there's different types of communication. So in our program, what we do is we kind of drill down into a distinction between communicating information and communicating intimacy. Mm-hmm. And information is just that. It's just like factual stuff, like, Bernhard, what time are you going to be home from work today? Or what does your day look like? Or, you know, just basic stuff, right? That doesn't have feelings attached to it. Doesn't have emotions attached to it, right? It's just facts. It's just facts. It just is what it is, right? Mm-hmm. We can attach our feelings to that sometimes, but intimacy is more about connecting with someone at a much deeper level. It involves sharing deeper things inside of us, especially our feelings, which I know as guys sometimes can be a hard thing to do.
Yeah. And if, like, what I also loved about the program, like, if a conflict comes up, or if you want to approach that intimate conversation with your wife, right? It's very helpful. Like, if you're triggered in some pain or some wound, it's always helpful to try to reflect on your own story, right? What you said in the beginning, your family context, or the dialect you speak, or the habits you have inherited from your family, to kind of also bring that to the table and basically invite your spouse to respond with affirmation and validation, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that's a huge point, that validating someone's feelings, we don't do that well. We don't do it well as a society. Yeah. I sure as heck don't do it in my own dynamics, whether it be my marital relationship or even, you know, some of my relationships with friends and colleagues.
Yeah.
What do we often hear? You know, we hear people say, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. Oh, I'm sorry that, you know, that's your feeling. We're kind of almost dismissive about it.
Yeah.
You're fine. You can have whatever feeling you want. And I think my role, especially as a husband, is to allow my wife to feel what she feels and not have that affect me in a negative way. And this might, the connotation of like our conversation right now is like maybe more like driven around conflict. Like, this isn't just about dealing with conflict. This is also about connecting at a deeper level for bonding and being connected to your spouse on a deeper human level, right? So it's not just like, oh, how are we going to resolve conflict when it comes to having differing feelings about something, but also how do I want to connect and understand something about my wife on a deeper level and how she wants to be pursued as a woman of God, as my wife. I need to understand that too.
Yeah, I love that a lot. And I agree. We live in a society that's very emotionally dismissive, and that's why the Men of Hope and the Hope's Garden community, we are doing a book study right now on Conrad Barr's Feeling and Healing Your Emotions, and I love it. And one main teaching of Conrad Barr's is also, right, our emotions, and it's also in the Catechism. our emotions itself are morally neutral, like in its core, like to its core. Emotions are in themselves outside of moral judgment. Of course, one emotion can trigger something like another emotion in another person, right?
Yeah.
But I think to use the expression of an emotion or the emotion itself, to use that as an opportunity for intimacy or an opportunity for closeness or learning more about my spouse, right? I think to view it in that way is definitely more helpful. Like kind of like a scientist or a coach or a, I want to learn more. We are so mysterious. Every human person is kind of a universe, right? And I think marriage, you have a whole life of studying your spouse,
Yeah.
and getting to know the story and the emotions and everything behind the emotions, which is
And something that just I just thought of in relation to this idea that feelings are feminine and men shouldn't talk about their feelings, leads me to the thought of the virtue in self-control that men can display when they encounter their feelings and can control their feelings in a way that doesn't allow them to be reactive or driven by an environment. So like nothing is, I think, more masculine than a man who can control himself in his passions.
self-mastery.
Right. So like intense emotion, whatever that might be, a feeling about something, but yet is still using his intellect and his will to drive the next step. And obviously, I think that there's no opportunity better for being sanctified in that area than in relationship, and particularly in the marital relationship, right?
Yeah.
So it's men who are controlled by their passions and controlled by their emotions are not actually men in control of anything. They're controlled by it. And I know that in my own life, because I know those examples and experiences where I have been controlled by my passions, both primarily for the bad, and also for the good in some ways. But it's something I'm constantly trying to work on.
Yeah.
And to your point also about Conrad Barr's referencing the neutrality of emotions, I think is powerful, because if we think about feelings are like the emotional climate, this was language that was written in the program that Ron and Kathy wrote. Feelings are like emotional climate. It's like the weather inside of us. Weather is only helpful. Is the only helpful thing to do with weather is to describe it, right? And that's what a weatherman's job is every day. Like, it's just to describe the weather, hot or cold or windy or humid but it's kind of neutral, right? It's just there. It doesn't necessarily make something bad or good, it's kind of what happens inside of us, is you just have to describe it.
Yeah. And you're also what the analogy with the weather, right? Also the weather of my spouse, of my wife. The best way to deal with it in the first place is to accept it, right? Like, there are certain life circumstances that trigger different emotions.
Yeah.
And I think I have to be the first person to validate my wife and all her emotions and her personal experience, and not like I don't know, trying to change my wife because I don't like certain feelings.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, that's probably one of the biggest challenges I know for me, and I think that other men would attest to this, is oftentimes I have my own feelings in response to my wife's feelings, and I don't like my feelings. And so often it's I blame her for the feelings incited in me. And, I might be triggered, that famous word that's gotten so popular over the years, to be triggered, right? But it's true, like certain things happen and I feel something in response to it. And I don't like the way that I feel because of what she said. Well, that's my problem. That's not her problem, right? I mean, we could objectively talk about maybe the way something was said or what I heard, but again, I can't blame her for how she feels. I shouldn't be blamed myself for how I feel. And I should also probably have a sense of like mercy towards myself. Often I'll kind of even emotionally beat myself up for having the feelings I have.
Yeah.
Oh, I shouldn't feel this way.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's always the most helpful approach to it.
Yeah. So, and when husband and wife basically affirm each other in this way and learn to communicate on that deeper emotional level for intimacy, right? Then the marriage truly becomes a path of helping each other grow towards emotional maturity and sanctification, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. And there's it deepens intimacy and it builds trust in the context of the relationship. A spouse will feel safe to share. And so intimate communication also is about what's happening in the present moment. It's not about the future and it's not about the past. So it's about what's happening right now. And so it's always important that in those moments to say like, this is how I'm feeling in this moment. It doesn't necessarily always help to bring up something in the past. You're trying to connect in the moment.
Yeah. This is sometimes my pitfall.
All of our pitfalls.
Like the context to go to the past and try to, because and then my argument is oftentimes, but my emotion is kind of connected to these past events and still, but I think to stay in the present is oftentimes really very important, because the connection and the intimacy happens in the present moment, right?
Yeah, and it allows you to connect with your spouse in a way that I know for me, I guess I'll just share my experience. It's been deeply healing for me, because I think a lot of, I didn't want to share certain things about how I felt in our marriage at certain times, because maybe I thought that those feelings were feelings of weakness or vulnerability, that I was scared to actually, if I'm being really honest, share what I was really feeling. And then to be received in that moment, to be validated in those feelings and to be accepted, strengthened the bonds of our marriage.
Yeah.
And there's a real grace in that, and it's sanctifying. There's a holiness that happens, right? I mean, that's what sanctifying grace is about. It's about making you holy. It's about making your marital bond holy. It's real. It's not just like something to do so you can have a comfortable and cohesive living environment.
Yeah.
Right. There's an end for why this happens. But if you don't come from a background where you were allowed to share your feelings, or your feelings were dismissed, or you were, one among many children, and you were just told, I grew up in an era where children were more seen than heard. And so I had to learn how to describe what's going on inside of me.
Yeah.
And it's still a work in progress.
It's actually very courageous, right? It's like we need to have a lot of courage and strength in order to reveal the vulnerable parts of our soul, right? And that's actually, maybe the word courage in connection to vulnerability is something more appealing to men. That it's actually a sign of strength to face these inner struggles and share those inner struggles with the spouse who we trust, right? And I like to rephrase that in a sense of strength and courage.
C.S. Lewis has a beautiful quote. It's fairly lengthy, but it starts with, "To love is to be vulnerable." I actually have it on a frame here that one of our engaged couples gave to us on their wedding day as a gift. And it's a beautiful quote about to love is to be vulnerable. And intimacy is built around vulnerability. The Latin word vulnerability vulnere, I believe it is comes from the derivative to wound. And so when we are vulnerable, we are opening ourselves up for the potential to be wounded, to be hurt, right? But also in our vulnerability, we're sharing our wounds. We're showing our wounds. And I think that, that beautiful Caravaggio painting of St. Thomas putting his finger into the wound of Christ. The Lord showed his wounds in the resurrection to the apostles, this vulnerability of like showing his woundedness, but it was like that was the saving, those wounds are what we're saved by.
Yeah.
And so all of this has meaning and purpose. It's not just wet noodles at the wall. And the ones that stick is like, well, that's what you need to do to have a successful marriage. Like the church in her beautiful wisdom has created for us this beautiful pathway of the sacraments, ultimately instituted by Christ himself. This is really the work of the Lord that we have to be thankful for. But yes, it is hard. You have to be courageous. I share this often in my own testimony, but I've been sober from alcohol for 11 years. And a part of facing my own need for sobriety was this act of needing to turn a light on in a dark room one night to share with my wife parts of my heart that she did not know about. And it was a physical act for me. I woke up in the middle of the night. It was a dark room. I had sweaty palms. And I turned the light on in the room and I told my wife parts of my heart that she had never heard before. And we had been married for a long time. And that vulnerability not only was showing my woundedness, but it was potentially even wounding my wife, but ultimately became the framework of a foundation that has made us stronger than I could have ever imagined. It's kind of, I have a lamp tattooed on my arm right here to remind me of that. The act of, really for me, it was the most courageous thing I've ever done in my life. And honestly, the most fearful and scariest moment of my life.
Wow.
Was modeling in that moment the vulnerability that I ultimately sought to have. And so I just walked right through it. And believe it or not, as painful as that journey was for my wife and I coming through my own recovery, was an incredible amount of intimacy that I encountered a love for my wife and received a love for my wife that I didn't actually know was even possible.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. Wow. So basically when we are able to accept our own vulnerability and share it, and a person receives us, right, that where the mystery of the cross and resurrection comes through the sacrament of matrimony, right? That this is actually very healing to us.
Yeah, for me, it was life-changing.
Yeah.
But it also kind of segues into the other part of what this topic of communicating for intimacy is really ultimately about. And it's about learning how to connect with a human on a very deep level, and ultimately our spouse. And the word that we use is really empathy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And empathy is something that's a deep connectedness with another person. It's to feel what that person is actually going through as if it's happening to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's at that level that there is an experience of connecting that is deep. And a part of my wife's journey with me through my own healing and my own recovery and my vulnerability was her connecting with me at a deep level of empathy. And so it wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. And it was about her entering into my feelings, entering into my experience of why I ended up in this circumstance in the first place, and asking questions and listening. It was no more about her and how she was hurt by anything. It was about what I had experienced. And so often we offer like cards of sympathy when someone passes away. But if you've never lost someone, you can really only sympathize with them. You don't really know what that feels like.
Mm.
But if you've lost a loved one and then somebody loses a loved one, now you can connect with that person in a very deep way, because you can empathize. You know what your loss feels like, and you can connect with them. So, of course, this can be done on a lot of different levels with a lot of different types of emotions. I'm just using this as one example.
Mm-hmm.
But the end goal is to communicate for intimacy, is to feel what that person feels. So if you're in an argument, and we'll just use the argument context, and your spouse tells you they feel embarrassed or stupid by something that transpired. Well, as a husband, the real act of love is not to be like, well, I'm sorry. It is not to say, well, I'm sorry you feel stupid, or you shouldn't feel stupid. The real act of love, the courageous thing to do as a husband, is to dive in and say, tell me more about that feeling. Yeah. Describe, what does it mean to feel stupid for you?
And not feel attacked and go into defensive mode, right? I have to defend myself because my wife's feeling just attacked me.
Yeah.
And that comes so natural to us, kind of.
Oh, well, yeah. There's a protective element, and there's a defensiveness, and there's a sinfulness in me. So then driving back again to what started this conversation is the masculine virtue in it.
Yeah.
Is the self-control to say, you know what, I'm gonna temper my feelings right now, and I want to understand what's going on with my wife.
I love that.
Hey, can you tell me more about when you say you feel stupid? Can you describe that to me? Like, what does that mean? Like, what's that like? The simile, right? Like as, right? Like it's stupid, like what? Like in a classroom in the 5th grade when the teacher asked you to give the answer to the question and you raised your hand with confidence thinking you knew the answer, and then you said it, and the teacher said, no, I'm sorry, that's the wrong answer. And everybody else in the classroom laughed at you. Is that the type of stupid you're describing? Because then maybe it's easy to empathize and enter into that experience because maybe you had that experience as well.
Yeah.
But that's an exercise of mind and will to want to go there. And that takes real fortitude, real self-control.
Yeah.
As opposed
to like
just be angry with my wife in that moment.
Yes. I mean, this was like so helpful, like for me with the relationship of my fiance back then and now my wife. We got married almost half a year ago now. But this was so helpful to actually, when I feel in a certain way and my wife may feel defensive, but it helps me if I succeed to reflect on my past and reveal more vulnerability where my present feeling actually has connection to past experiences, and then I share it with my wife. This all of a sudden opens up a new atmosphere. Like the whole tension is clarified, and all of a sudden vulnerability can be very scary, right? Because we are afraid that we are hurt again in the same way we have been in the past. But many times, particularly with our spouses, the opposite actually happens. that my wife, when I opened up more about myself, shared more about my vulnerability, that she actually was more moved and drawn to me.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a deep connecting and bondedness that can happen in a relationship, an intimate relationship. And then that intimacy is about so much more than facts, so much more about information. It's about sharing deeply about how I feel. And of course, because we're human beings, we're never not feeling. We're never not feeling.
Yeah.
Whether one wants to admit that or acknowledge that, well, that's for a separate conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is that the way we were created is to feel, because our feelings are not, they're beautiful things. They drive us. They allow us to be, to connect.
Yeah.
They allow us to connect, and not just in marital relationships or romantic relationships, but to feel with other human beings, and often the world is we're kind of separated now, just casting stones at each other for the way we feel about, whether that be your religious affiliation, your political affiliation, even within the Catholic Church, how you feel about various, liturgical practices or faith practices. It creates more division when we should be more brought together.
Yeah. I really love that. It's so good. It's so good.
And it doesn't, and it's not the natural for me. Like, the natural is the trap. Like, so in many respects, like connecting on a very deep and intimate level is learning how to listen to your spouse.
Yeah.
Even in good debate, whether you agree with, things in the political landscape or what you see on TV. Like, one of the things I do respect is people who will listen to their opponent.
And try to understand, and
right?
truly try to,
even if you don't actually agree and have no interest in agreeing, at least listen to them.
Yeah.
Right. But what we do with our spouses, at least what I do, so I'm not going to say what other people do, but I think there's a common thread there, is we're not good at listening. We're terrible at listening. I'm terrible at listening. And so what I'm doing is I'm listening with my answer being formulated in my brain while my wife is arguing her point. Right. So instead of trying to understand why she's feeling the way she's feeling and asking questions about trying to empathize with her, I'm actually formulating my defense in my mind. Right. And so I'm not listening to her. I'm thinking, as I shared earlier, I'm thinking about how her feelings affect my feelings. So again, not about her.
Yeah.
That's a big one, right?
Yeah. And, I love the question you asked, like you said earlier, about, tell me more about the emotion, right? I want to understand more. I want to be like, I want to be like a guardian or a scientist who really wants to do some research here and understand better. And I think that's also very helpful if we can give our wives the feeling that we at least try to understand, right? Sometimes,
it's hard. It's hard. And I think that's where the virtue, that's where we as men can build the virtue of self-control, self-mastery, by challenging ourselves in those moments that if you're feeling something intense about what you're hearing, try to understand better what you're hearing by asking a question in response to what you're hearing. Even if it's simple as, can you tell me more about that? Or can you describe more? Help me understand this feeling that's so intense. Because, it's amazing. Anybody who's been married for a number of years knows that fighting, you can end up in an argument and then forget what the argument's about. You can be like, what are we even arguing about right now? We're just fighting over our feelings and how I feel about the situation. And then, we're not connecting. We're debating rather than relating, right? That's a term that Ron and Kathy use in their program. We presume negative motive, right? And then, we're hearing with our ears, but we're not listening with our hearts.
Yeah.
Right. It's just like, there's a difference between hearing and listening deeply. A good friend and mentor of mine shared with me over the years that anytime two people are talking, there's 4 conversations that are going on. There's what I said and what I think I said, and what they heard and what they think they heard.
That's good.
And so every conversation filters through this. So just using that, like, are my words matching my thoughts with my heart and my mind, and what I'm hearing, asking for validation? So is it beloved wife, so when you say this, is it fair for me to understand, or that this is what you're upset about? One of my wife had shared with me, and I'm sure she shared this in our times, but like, my behavior in addiction was often about just forgetting about my wife. Because when you're only consumed in yourself, in an alcohol addiction, you don't think about other people a whole lot. And often there were many moments where my wife was forgotten.
Wow.
And what a powerful moment for me to understand the power of what that felt like to be forgotten. And as a husband, how I never want her to feel forgotten ever again. So much so that when we walk in a parking lot, I'm a lot taller than she is. She's small in stature. I just walk and I put my hand behind my back because I'm usually about 5 paces ahead of her. And my hand back is always to let her know you're not forgotten. I know you're right behind me. And she kind of scurries up and grabs my hand. And it's how we, walk. And so she doesn't think for a minute, oh, my husband's just heading off to where he thinks he needs to go. But he's very much aware. And really, it's just my stature that's moving at twice the speed that she is. So I need to move my arm back and slow it down. And that, believe it or not, that's a very bonding moment for us. And it could draw us close as we're walking into the grocery mart, for whatever that's worth.
Those are these little gestures of love, right? Love gestures.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That communicates intentionality around, I see you, right? Do you ever, I don't know if you remember the movie Avatar, but it came out a while ago. They came up with a new one, but it's, I think.
This with the blue guys and
the blue people. Right.
Yeah.
And what I always loved about that movie, I'm not really big into science fiction, but I did watch that movie. It was very well done. The way that the people in the film greeted each other, the avatars, the blue people, they would say to each other in their greeting, I see you. That was their greeting to each other. It's interesting. I've had it like intimacy is into me, you see, right? Like this phonetic breakdown of intimacy is about you seeing into me.
Wow.
And being loved and known and accepted in that place. And even the biggest and toughest guys who don't want to face their feelings often want to be seen. They just don't feel seen. And I know that because that's my lived experience. Right. So I love that about that connection about the avatar when I don't know if they did that by intention, but they're creative. That I see you. And I see all of you. I see more than just your physical stature. I see your heart and your mind. And I choose you and I love you, even in the midst of hurt and disagreement.
I really love that.
It's something that I think over the 27 years that I've been married and, 24 as a Catholic and 17 as somebody who's been really involved in marriage prep. This is just my experience, and I think it just, for all of us men and for anybody who wants to connect with their spouse on a deeper level, just start asking more questions. Tell me how you feel about that, and don't be bothered about how you feel in response to that. Just get to know and understand and describe that feeling and try to connect on a very deep level about what that feels like to feel that way.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. That's an awesome reminder for me as well. It's so good. It's so good. Maybe one more thing that I would briefly talk with you about, because that was the second exercise that I learned from that Prepare to Live in Love program, is the couple consensus. To learn to make decisions together. And I really I have it here in front of me. Because there are so many pitfalls and how to make decisions, right? Whoever feels stronger leads the decision. The more competent leads the decision. Divide and conquer, you go into debate and discussion, or win-lose, or even win-win. I try to make both win. But that has pitfalls also. Would you like to share how this one topic of communicating for intimacy can help you with that couple consensus exercise kind of?
Sure. I think really I'll summarize it in one statement.
Okay.
Do what's in the best interest of your marriage. Make a decision about ultimately what's in the best interest of your marriage. Not what I think's in the best interest of our marriage, what she thinks is in the best interest of the marriage, but what we think is in the best interest of our marriage. And the way that is best understood is by taking it off of the person and putting it out in front of the couple, saying, this is what we are trying to decide to do out here. What are the pros and cons, the SWOT analysis, strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and, threats. What is this we're trying to achieve? How do I feel about it? How do you feel about it? And then do we together believe that this is in the best interest of our marriage? So it's not me convincing you to agree to this perspective. It's not me trying to make you like the win-win. I'll give you something good too if you choose it. But it's both of you freely choosing this option in front of you so that ultimately you're together in that decision and you share both in the positive and the negative of the decision. So when you're freely choosing it, you understand, okay, let's just say it was about a big move or a job decision, but that job decision was requiring you to be away from your family for an extended period of time, or you were going to work really, long hours, or you had to be separate. I was a military guy. I deployed, right? So making a decision in the best interest, we understand all that is encompassed with this decision. And we together as a couple both freely choose it. Because as I said to you earlier, the most important question that you're asked on your wedding day is, do you come here freely? Well, every subsequent question, that's posed to the marriage, you want to freely respond to. And you never want one spouse to feel dismissive or smaller in that decision, even if it might be more focused on, well, this is the husband's career, or this is the wife's career, or this is going to affect our children. What is ultimately in the best interest of our marriage? And if we both freely choose it, we both together, arm in arm, are moving forward, accepting the outcomes of both the good and the bad. And I think that way you prevent resentments from being born. Oh, you caused this to us. You made this happen to us. We should have never moved here. It was because of you. That there's no good that ever comes from that, right?
Yeah.
So that's really kind of what is in the best interest of our marriage. Do we both freely choose it? And if you approach it that way, I don't think you can go wrong.
Yeah, that's so good. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. And I remember like the program from Ron and Kathy Fair, they line out 7 steps, right, of how to really do that practically. That's what I love about that program. It gives you so many tools how to handle these life challenging, decisions. And I want to just these 7 steps, I want to quickly read them to our listeners because I just really love it. Like the first step is what we have talked about the whole time, like communicating for intimacy. Like we want to validate and set aside emotions. Like we want to first be in a place of peace, right? We want to first be in a place where we have already validated feelings, where we had that communication for intimacy, and we're basically now able to address.
Not emotionally charged in the moment. Yeah. Right? That's not the time to make big decisions for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I use this analogous to like young people when I talk with young people about like nobody ever said they made the best decisions in their life at 2:00 in the morning. Nothing good happens after midnight, right? Just get in bed. Like understand those dynamics for your own marriage. Yeah. And one of them is not trying to make a decision in an emotionally charged situation.
Yeah. And the second step is actually praying, right? Pray for wisdom and discernment, like the couple sitting together in prayer.
Yes.
That's another important point, right? For marriages to succeed, of having a real active prayer life.
Yeah, by the grace of God go I. I mean, without the grace of the Lord, without the sacraments, this is hard to do on your own.
Yeah. Okay, then number 3 is write out your proposal. Like each spouse should write out the proposal about the decision and include values, the costs, the benefits, and now like discern in my proposal what is in the best interest of our marriage.
Yep.
And then number 4, you exchange that letter and you pray for openness. You're asking God to speak to you through your spouse.
Yep.
And you allow yourself to be moved. And this is just the listening time. It's not a discussion time yet. It's like I allow myself to be moved by my spouse's values and discernment. And then number 5, we pray again. So the first 5 steps is basically no discussion yet, no debate. It's really just, and that's what I love so much. Like the next step 5 is again, we pray. And I love that question that is asked here again. Can I make what is important to you important to me?
Yeah, that's a powerful one.
And then we pray about that. And then after that, we write a second proposal, right? Where we want to include our wives or spouses' discernment. And then, yeah, after number 6, this was step 6, we write the second proposal. And then we exchange the letter again. And we repeat that process so long as we need to. And the solution is basically when we find a decision, a course of action that both can own like equally, completely.
Yeah.
And all the consequences of that decision.
Without a doubt. Yeah. You know, and it takes a little bit of time. That's not something that happens quickly, right? And so we are a fast moving society, and we want answers right away, and we want to resolve conflict right away, and we want decisions made right away. But I think that this what you just shared in Ron and Kathy's program, the decision making aspect of the program is really encouraging, couples to really work through, especially big decisions, right? Yeah. But you don't have to do this for like what you're going to have dinner tonight or something like that. But anywhere where you and your spouse are not connecting, or you cannot understand each other, like, I don't know why this is important to you, or I don't know why we're even talking about this. And so, yeah, it's it's so good that I think if implemented correctly, it's nearly foolproof for your marriage.
Yeah. I'm so grateful to have these tools here, and I'm just thrilled about sharing it with as many as I can. And that's why I'm so happy, Bobby, for your time today with Men of Hope podcast. I'm really very thrilled and grateful.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Obviously, I'm forever grateful to Ron and Kathy. They were married for 40 years when they led us through this program. I've lost touch with them over the years, but that would be the 57 years of marriage. I don't even know if any of them, if they're still living or not, but nonetheless, I think let's pray for them and for so many who make marriage work a part of their apostolate and their vocation, because we know that we live in a culture where there's a real crisis of marriage, and we need restoration of the family. And it starts with really things like this, which I don't know where I'd be if it wasn't for that. So thank you for the time, and always so good to be with you.
Bobby, thank you. God bless you.
We'll talk soon.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.